Thank you. Blessings. Good evening. It's so great to see all of you here this evening. Probably most of you have never heard of me or El Shaddai before. So let me just show you this first PowerPoint. Hopefully everything is going to be working. That's the idea. Did you see it change? Because I can't see if it changes from here. Like you said, I started El Shaddai in 2001 with just a couple of other families. And now we have about 700 who meet with us every weekend. We have about 4,000 people who live stream. We average over 3 million hits a month on our website. But one of the reasons why is I give everything away for free. Our videos, audios, notes, we just make it available. Because for me, it's really important just getting the information out. If you want to search for us, it's easier to just type my name in your Google search, Mark Belts. Even if you put Blitz, it'll probably still find us. But it is Mark Belts. And we have all kinds of information, like even here you see the hidden treasures of the alphabet. How many of you could talk for 1 hour on the letter K? I spend 1 hour talking on each letter of the Hebrew alphabet. 22 hours teaching. It's all free. It's all on our website. You can watch that. One of the things that I want to speak about tonight, obviously, is the signs in the heavens. But one of the most important things I want everyone to realize is we need to have the right perspective. How many of you know you can see something, but if you're not looking at it from the right perspective, it's going to be completely different? So let's take a look at this first slide here. How many of you, when you were little, thought your backyard was just so big, and then when you went back as an adult, you were surprised at how little it was? You know, I thought our bedroom was so big, but as you grow older, everything seems smaller. Well, as you can see, the Earth, compared to Venus, Mars, Mercury, Pluto, is pretty big. How many of you have been to Israel? How many of you want to go back? All right. Well, it's a long ways to get there. From Washington State, where I am, it takes about 24 hours, a full day to finally get there. The Earth is pretty big, isn't it? And when you look at it compared to these other planets, you think, man, it's really big. But let's look at it from another perspective. There's Earth now. Compared to Jupiter and Saturn and Neptune, some of the other planets, all of a sudden you see Earth, our perspective has just changed. The Earth isn't real big anymore, is it? Compared to Jupiter. Well, how big is Jupiter compared to our nearest star, the sun? The perspective changes again. All of a sudden you realize the stars, they are huge. Earth is so tiny, you can barely even see it right now. But now when you look at our sun, which as you can see obviously is huge, how does it compare to some of the other stars? So here's our sun compared to some of the other stars. Arcturus is in the constellation Bootes. It's at his knee. It's even mentioned in the Bible, believe it or not, in the book of Job. It mentions the star Arcturus. Now, when you see Arcturus, what you say Arcturus, now that's a big star. I mean, when you look at our sun, how big it was, you can't even see Earth. You can't even see Jupiter. Arcturus is pretty big, wouldn't you say? Well, here's Arcturus, that little tiny orange ball next to Rigel, Aldebaran, Betelgeuse, and Antares. All of a sudden, Arcturus is nothing compared to Antares. Now, wouldn't you say Antares, now that's a really big star? Well, here's Antares compared to Canis Majoris. That means the big dog star. This is the largest star that we know of. Now, how many of you know how fast the speed of light travels? How would you like to travel at 186,000 miles per second? All right? It takes 14 and a half seconds for light to circle our sun one time. It takes 8 hours to circle Canis Majoris one time at 186,000 miles per second. Now, it is 4,900 light years away. Do you know what that means? That means you have to travel 186,000 miles per second for 4,900 years to get there. That means Methuselah would just now be getting there at 186,000 miles per second. The reason for this is I want to give you another perspective, because it says in the scriptures that God holds all of these in the palm of his hand. Now, can you imagine, doesn't that increase your awe of God? And to think here God holds the entire universe in the palm of his hand, and he looks down at you and me and says, hey, I want a relationship with you. I'm surprised you can even see us. Seriously. But the more amazing thing is, man will often go, no. Now that is just unbelievable to me. So in Isaiah 46, verse 10, I talk fast. I'm sorry I didn't have notes for everybody, but you don't need to look it up. Just write the reference down and look it up later. Many of you are familiar with most of these verses, but in Isaiah 46:10, it said God declared the end from the beginning. How many of you believe that? From the ancient times, things that are not yet done. So what do we see in Genesis 1:1? It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So what is this telling us? That if we really want to comprehend end times, because he declared the end from the beginning, if you want to know prophecy, you need to study Genesis. I don't have time. I showed some of the people out in the hallway at our table. I can show you in Revelation, it talks about how Jesus was slain from the foundation of the world. The first word of the Bible in Hebrew, Bereshit, I can show you in that one word how Jesus came. He died on a tree, had a crown of thorns upon his head, and he was going to rise again. Everything, it was declared from the very, very beginning. Now, the question is, why did God create the sun and the moon and the stars to begin with? Most of us think, well, it had to be for light and heat, right? But there's much more. There is so much more, and that's what we're going to look at this evening. In Genesis 1:14, which is basically one of the main texts, because he declared the end from the beginning, what does it say? God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and then look at what he says, the reason why he created them. He said, let them be for signs. That's the number one reason he has here, for signs. And then it says, let them be for seasons, for days, and for years. Well, the Hebrew word for signs here is ot. And what it means like a signal. You ever familiar with one if by land, two if by sea? Okay, this kind of a thing. The Hebrew word for sign here, let's take a look at this. Now watch, here we go. It's a sign. Okay, God created the sun and the moon to send signals. That's why he created them. That's the first two reasons. But here's the thing. We see here one of the main reasons that God created the sun and the moon was to send us signals. That's what Genesis 1:14 says. I can't help but think of a baseball coach, too, who, wiggles his nose and flips his hat. But what happens if the runner doesn't know the signal? You're missing out. This is why it's so important for Christians to understand God's signals and understand his feast days, which is what we're going to be talking about. Here's the thing. If you are a student of Bible prophecy and you are not on God's biblical calendar, you're like a ship in the middle of the ocean without any navigational equipment. This is the prophecy conference. I can tell you right now, if you do not know the biblical calendar, you are going to miss a lot of very important things that you're going to see. As a matter of fact, in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1, it says, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. Do you think God has purpose things on this earth? Then he has a time and a season for it. So what time is it? Well, the next reason in Genesis, after signs, it says, was for seasons. Now, what do we think of when we think of seasons? Winter, spring, summer, fall, right? But this is a wrong translation. That is not the correct word. The Hebrew word here is moed, and it's translated into English, not only here as seasons, but another place, the same Hebrew word they translate as seasons here, is translated in Leviticus 23 as the word feast. Now, think about this. Here you have one Hebrew word. It's translated as seasons in Genesis 1:14. The same word is translated as feast in Leviticus 23:2. One of them, I think of food. The other one, I think of winter, spring, summer, fall. Both those are wrong translations. This is why if you really want to understand the Bible and biblical prophecy, you've got to know a little bit about the Hebrew mindset. You've got to know some of the Hebrew words, because to have one word mean food, and then also winter, spring, summer, fall, you can see how that's kind of dumb, right? So what is the correct Hebrew or English translation for that word? It's a divine appointment. So in other words, in Genesis 1:14, God says, I created the sun and the moon to send signals on the divine appointments. All right? It's like God has a day timer. How many of you have a day timer? All right? So here, this is God's day timer. He has divine appointments scheduled. All right? Now, how many of you believe in divine appointments? Guess what? They're scheduled. When you're on the biblical calendar, it's like, why would I not want to be there? How many of you want to meet with God? When you think about this, when the Shekinah glory was in the Exodus, the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud by day and by night, does that mean God wasn't in China? Does that mean God wasn't in South America? No. But he was there in a very special, significant way. This is why we want to understand God's divine appointments, because on those days, God is there in a special, unique way, different than any other time. So this is why we want to connect and have a better understanding of God's daytimer and the feasts. In Psalms 104, God states that he appointed the moon specifically for the divine appointments, or the moeds. And the problem with the English translation is that, again, they use the wrong word, using it as seasons. It's in Psalm 104:19. It says he appointed the moon for seasons. No, he appointed the moon for his divine appointments. That's when he appointed the moon. Well, we need to realize Passover is one of the feasts. Okay? It is a divine appointment that God had scheduled in his daytimer. That's why in Revelation it said he was slain from the foundation of the world. God determined from the foundation of the world when his son was going to die. He even determined what songs were going to be sung at his funeral. That's why he had David write the Psalms, because that was their hymn book. Matter of fact, you know, it says they sang a hymn at the Last Supper, went over the Mount of Olives. I can tell you the words to that song. You have the words to that song. They would always sing the Hallel, Psalm 113 through Psalms 118. What Psalm 118 would have been the last hymn before he was betrayed and rejected. And what are those words? This is the stone the builders have rejected. It's become the headstone of the corner. So God had divinely appointed these times. So, with that in mind, I want you to realize the feasts of the Lord really are divine appointments when God had predetermined when he's going to intersect human history. Now, let me ask you something. What would happen if you lost your daytimer with all your important contact information and your scheduled appointments? Okay. And if we don't understand God's daytimer and his appointments, we're going to be lost. What if you lost it even and you didn't even know it until at the last minute it's too late? Oh my goodness, where's my appointment book? I can't find it. You're in trouble. Now, how about if your competitor was so mean, he followed you around, and when you set your daytimer down, he stole it. Because he wanted to go to your customers and steal your customers from you. Well, the devil is kind of like that. He took God's daytimer away from us. And I want you guys to know it's lost, and I want you to get it back. And that's why I'm speaking here tonight. Now, here's another scenario. Let's say you wanted to meet someone, but they live on the other side of the world. And you knew, man, what are the chances of me ever getting to meet that person? But let's say you go to the airport and you have to wait for a couple of hours for a layover. And unbeknownst to you, that person you wanted to meet is at the next gate and you don't even know it. Wouldn't you like to have someone come and tell you who knew both of you so you could make that connection? Well, that's what I want to do tonight, is make that connection for you guys. So what we need to do is we need to be on God's time clock. So I got a picture here of a little time clock or a calendar. And really, what it's all about, God has Israel as the timepiece, and the Moedim, the feasts, are like the hands on the clock that go round and round. Think of time as circular rather than linear. We need to be aware of the biblical calendar. But here's the problem. As many of you know, the Muslim calendar is based totally on the moon. This is why Ramadan will be in December, another year in July. It rotates, all right? But God commanded that Passover always be in the spring, all right? So the Muslims only follow a lunar calendar. The pagan calendar that we use by Julius Caesar, and then Pope Gregory modified it, okay, is a pagan solar calendar. It's totally based on the sun. But if you remember in Genesis 1:14, God said, let them, both the moon and the sun, be for the appointed times. Only the Torah has the biblical calendar that is based on both the sun and the moon. We add one day every 4 years for our leap year. On that calendar, they add an entire month, 7 times over 19 years, because it's a lunar solar calendar. It uses both. Now, here's the thing. I used to live right here close to Colorado in Garden City, and that's right where the time zone changes from Central Time to Mountain Time. Everybody had to have 2 clocks. Because you would live in one time zone, you could drive across the street, and it's an hour later. And that's without traffic. And I'm from Seattle, I know what that's like. But so if you're going to call somebody in another time zone, if you want to make an appointment and you want to meet with somebody, you have to agree, okay, whose time zone? Like if I do a radio interview and they're in Florida and I'm in Seattle, they say to call at 9 in the morning. It's like, okay, is that your time or my time? That's 6 in the morning, my time. So if you want to connect with someone, you have to be on the same time zone. You got to make sure you're on the right calendar, you're on the right clock. Well, when it comes to connecting with God and having his special presence, you want to connect to the biblical calendar. Now, in Zechariah chapter 8, verse 19, listen to this verse. And we go ahead and put up this next clip. It says, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the fast of the 4th month, the fast of the 5th, the fast of the 7th, and the fast of the 10th shall be to the house of Judah joy and gladness, cheerful feast, therefore love, truth, and peace." Now let me ask you something. When it says the 7th month, do you think it's talking July here? Not at all. This is a prophecy. So if you're a prophecy student, right here he's prophesying that these 4 fasts that are all tied to the destruction of the temple, he says they're going to be turned into days of feasting and rejoicing. And actually the word is moed. But guess what? If you don't know on the calendar when those days are, how are you going to know when that prophecy is fulfilled? There are things that are happening in Israel, even over the last few years, that Christians were totally clueless, the prophetic significance, because they have the wrong calendar. You've got to look at God's calendar. And I'm going to give you some examples here in just a minute. This fast of the 10th month, let me show you how important it is to God. In Ezekiel 24, verse 1 and 2, it says, "Again in the 9th year, in the 10th month," there it is, "the 10th day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, write the name of this day down, even this very same day that the king of Babylon set himself against Jerusalem this day." If this day was so important to God that he said, you write this day down, I don't want you to ever forget it. It's going to be in the Torah for all eternity. This day is important to God. And I think if this day is important to God, it should be important to us. Especially when he prophesied something was going to happen on the 10th of Tevet. Well, if you don't know when the 10th of Tevet is, how do you know that prophecy's been fulfilled? How many of you ever heard of the 9th of Av? How many of you have never heard of the 9th of Av? Okay, bad day. The 9th of Av, remember the story how these 10 spies brought a bad report, but Joshua and Caleb brought the good report? That happened on the 9th of Av. Now, because the biblical calendar doesn't line up with ours, sometimes it's in August, sometimes it's in July. It'll bounce back and forth. Well, guess what? Because the spies brought the bad report, that day has been cursed throughout Jewish history. When Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple, it was on the 9th of Av. 600 years later, when Rome destroyed the temple in 70 AD, same day, 9th of Av. In 1290, all the Jews were kicked out of England on the 9th of Av. 1492, all the Jews were kicked out of Spain on the 9th of Av. World War I started on the 9th of Av. Hitler's proclamation to kill the Jews was on the 9th of Av. In 2005, they evacuated the Gaza Strip. Sunset of the 9th of Av. They rejected the land the same day the spies rejected it 3,500 years ago. The Lebanon War. It started on the 17th of Tammuz. That's the day they worshiped the golden calf. That's the same day Nebuchadnezzar stormed through the northern walls. And it's the same day the missiles came through the northern border of Lebanon. But if you're not on God's calendar, when you're reading the news and you see these, this is why I like Bill Koenig's book and his work with Eye to Eye, kind of lining up the events that are happening. If you're not on God's calendar, how are you going to connect these dots? This is why it's so important. All too often, It's from an anti-Semitic viewpoint that we relegate all of the feasts of the Lord to the trash bin of history. That's for the Jews. But it says the feasts of the Lord. These are my feasts. It doesn't say the feast of the Jews. It doesn't say the feast of the Israel. And if God's throwing a party, why would I not want to go? The feasts were also called holy convocations. Now, what is a convocation? Well, it's like an assembly. But more than that, in Hebrew, the word is mikra, and it implies it's a dress rehearsal. It's a dress rehearsal for what's to come. So why do you think they killed the Passover lamb at 3 o'clock on Passover every year? It's a dress rehearsal. Now, they didn't know what year this was going to happen, but I'm going to lay some things out for you. Now, how many of you want to be at the wedding of the Messiah? Don't you think it'd be a good idea to be at the dress rehearsal? Okay. I'd want to be at the dress rehearsal. Can you imagine? I don't know how much time I'm going to have here, so I've got to cover a lot of ground quick, but I want to throw this in here. You know, the Bible says that the last trump will all be changed, right? Like if I said I hit the ceiling, that really means what? I got mad. But if they accurately translated I hit the ceiling 2,000 years from now, everyone would be debating how high I jumped. Okay? That last trump, that term is a Hebrew idiom for the 100th blast on Rosh Hashanah. So it's telling you this event will happen on Rosh Hashanah. We don't know what year, but it's going to be at the last trump. These are Hebrew idioms that when you understand the culture, just like how many of you know when Peter denied Christ, the cock crowed 3 times? That had nothing to do with chickens and roosters. They weren't even allowed historically in Jerusalem. Nothing to do with it. Yes, the event happened, but it was the temple priest who at sunrise would call out 3 times for the priest to come and begin their services. He was known as the cockcrow. Now, this has no great theological implications, but if you don't understand the culture and you're looking at everything from a Western mindset, you're going to miss what really happened. So we need to understand these feasts are dress rehearsals. This is why every year at Passover at 3 p.m., which is the time of the evening sacrifice, they would slay the Passover lamb. They were doing the dress rehearsal for the real event. So we have the correct concept of the feast when we see they were divinely appointed dress rehearsals when God would intersect human history. This is so important for us to get this. In Matthew 14:26 is where they sang a hymn and went to the Mount of Olives. And again, they were singing the Hallel. That was their hymn book. And it was Psalms 118. And what are they singing right as he was rejected? Right before? Psalm 118:22. The stone which the builders refused has become the headstone of the corner. As a matter of fact, Josephus records there were 2.5 million people at Passover in Jerusalem during the time of the Lord. 2.5 million people there for the feast. Can you imagine a huge choir of 2.5 million people all singing? I mean, this is huge. And think about this. What happens? In Mark, I believe it says Yeshua was crucified the 3rd hour of the day. That's 9 a.m, time of the morning sacrifice. At the very moment the high priest is binding the Passover lamb to the horns of the altar, they're binding the Lamb of God to the cross, and 2.5 million people are singing Psalms 118, binding the sacrifice with cords even to the horns of the altar. And then at noon, when it's pitch black, it all goes black, and Yeshua's been lifted up, and he said, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me. What are they doing? They're singing the Hallel. And what is Psalms 118? The right hand of the Lord is lifted up. The right hand of the Lord is exalted. This is what they're singing and what he's hearing them sing. 3 p.m, he dies. Okay, and what are they doing? They're singing the Hallel. And it's the time of the evening sacrifice. In Revelation, when it says he was slain from the foundation of the world, God predetermined exactly what day he was going to die, what time he was going to die, what songs they're going to sing at his son's funeral. Now, I mean, this is incredible. So what do we find? He was buried the next day on the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then, what do we find 3 days later? The Jews have a feast called the Feast of First Fruits of the barley harvest. So what happens on the Feast of First Fruits? He becomes the first fruits of the resurrection on the Feast of First Fruits. Do you think this is a coincidence? Do you think God said, oh, gee, they killed my son, I got to go to plan B? This has been planned out. And then a lot of people don't realize it, but guess what? They have what's called the counting of the Omer. From the Feast of First Fruits, they count 50 days to the Feast of Shavuot, which we know as Pentecost. Most Christians don't know that Jews have been keeping Pentecost for 1,500 years before Pentecost. They were the first Pentecostals, guys. And do you know, to this day, I don't know of any Pentecostal that keeps the Feast of Pentecost, and the Jews still do, even to this day. And so this is why we need to get on God's calendar. And what happened on the Feast of Pentecost? Peter said, these guys aren't drunk. It's what? It's the third hour of the day, 9 in the morning, time of the morning sacrifice. On the Feast of Shavuot, the Holy Spirit's poured out. Why? This was all planned. In Acts, it says they were Jews from every nation there. Why? They were required to be there for the Feast of Shavuot. Okay? So this is all plain in the Scripture. Let's see. In Leviticus 23, 10 and 11 is where it talks about, well, I'll just read it to you. It says, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, you'll reap the harvest. You'll bring in a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest and wave the sheaf before the Lord. And it's to be accepted on the morrow after the Sabbath. That's the Feast of First Fruits. Well, what happened on the morrow after the Sabbath? That's when he rose. That's from Matthew 28:1. And in 1 Corinthians 15:20, we see that Messiah has become the first fruits of those that have slept. And then in Leviticus 23, 15 through 17 is where they are to count the 50 days, the counting of the Omer to the Feast of Pentecost. That's in Leviticus 23, 15 through 17. So, let me ask you this. See, give you a test. Why did God create the sun and the moon? When? On his feast days, on his appointed time. Eclipses happen all the time throughout history. As a matter of fact, if you go to NASA's website, it has 7,000 years of eclipses, way in the past, way in the future, because God created everything mathematically. How many believe God's a scientist? Okay. How many believe he's a mathematician? He's got these things kind of figured out. And that's why the feast days fall like on the 1st of Nisan, 1st of Rosh Hashanah, because that's when you can have a solar eclipse. Why does Passover and Tabernacles fall in the middle of the month? That's the only time you can have a lunar eclipse. He timed them so the eclipses could fall on the feast days. Now, if there's eclipses that are happening, they're not falling on the feast days, that's just an eclipse. But when God has an eclipse falling on a feast day, signal, hello, anybody on my calendar? But if you don't know that it's even one of God's divinely appointed times, how would you know God's trying to tell you something? Just like the baseball player that doesn't know the signal of the hat and the wiggling of the nose. So let's look again here real quick. Genesis 1:14. He says, let there be lights in the firmament. Let them be for signs, for the divine appointments, and for days and years. And these days and years refers to the Jubilee year, the Shemitah year, the biblical days. It's nothing to do with our pagan calendar. But here he says he created the sun and the moon for signs. Well, what does the gospel say in Luke 21? There will be what? Gee, I wonder why. How about because God said that's why I created them? Okay? So, with that in mind, listen to Luke 21, verse 11. It says, and great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, famines, pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. You know the amazing thing about the sun and the moon and the stars, I don't remember if I have this verse here, I think I do, but I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead. Psalms 19:1, the heavens declare the glories of God, right? And what language can't read that? God warns the watchmen that they have to warn the people the blood's on his hands. God holds to the same principle. He has to warn humanity as well. What better way to warn 100 different languages than communicating it by the sun and the moon on his feast days that everyone can understand? This is God talking. So, do you remember what the Lord had said to those that didn't understand the times in his time? In Luke 12:56, he says, you hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky and of the earth, but how is it you don't discern this time? How come you don't get this? If you remember, the sons of Issachar, they had understanding of their times. If you want to be like the sons of Issachar, you need to understand God's appointed times. Now, how many of you believe the king is coming? The bigger question is, are you ready? We want to be ready. One of the things that happened to me back in March 2008, I saw this total lunar eclipse over the Temple Mount, and I thought, man, that is incredible. It's just gorgeous. And then these verses came to my mind from Isaiah, from Joel, from the Gospels, from Revelation, about the sun turning to sackcloth and the moon to blood. And because I knew God was mathematical, and I knew NASA had this great website listing all the eclipses, I thought, well, let me just go and see if there's anything interesting in the next 10 years. So I went to NASA's website, and this came up. This is right from their website. And at the bottom, I noticed there were 4 total lunar eclipses back to back. You'll see it in April 15th of 2014, October 8th, April 4th, and September 20th, 2015. And I thought, because I love math, I said, wow, how often does that happen? Well, do you know this did not happen at all in the 1800s, the 1700s, or the 1600s? In the 1500s, it happened 7 times, but none of them fell on the feast days, as far as 4 in a row. But I'm looking at this, looking at the months, April, October, and I'm in my prayer closet, and I'm praying, I'm contemplating, and all of a sudden it's like this voice says, hello, you need to switch this to the biblical calendar. And so I immediately went to the biblical calendar, and I noticed, oh my goodness, they fall on the first day of Passover and the first day of Sukkot in 2014. Then they fall again on Passover and Sukkot in 2015. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I just got done reading how God said he created the sun and the moon to send signals on his divine appointments. And here we have these 4 blood moons in a row on Passover and Sukkot, Passover and Sukkot. And I said, this is not a coincidence. But how many of you know God has to be 100% correct? So I immediately went to see, wow, is there any interesting solar eclipses during this time frame? Adar 29, Nisan 1, which is the day the glory fell. That's the day of the opening celebration of Moses' tabernacle, and the fire falls from heaven. That begins the religious calendar. God told Moses, I'm going to begin this year on Nisan 1 for the religious calendar, right? We have the 2 blood moons and Passover and Sukkot, followed by a total solar eclipse to begin the religious calendar, followed by another total blood moon on Passover, followed by another solar eclipse on Rosh Hashanah, followed by another blood moon on Sukkot. Now, it's like God is screaming, hello, is anybody listening? As far as what's going to happen, I tell everybody, look, and a lot of people misunderstand what I'm trying to say, so let me tell you what I'm not saying. I'm not saying there's going to be some event happen on any one of these specific days. That's not what I'm saying. I tell everyone, look, you put this in your own theological pipe and smoke it like you want. All right? Here's what I do know. God says if the watchman sees something, they're to warn. I'm just warning. I don't know what's going to happen. But I will tell you this. I believe in looking at the patterns. Do you know when the last time was that you had 4 blood moons in a row on Passover and Sukkot? Actually, I'm going to go back a little bit further. Do you remember 1948, Israel became a nation? Guess what? 1949, 1950, 4 blood moons in a row, Passover and Sukkot, Passover and Sukkot. 1967, Israel captures Jerusalem. What do you have? 1967, 1968, 4 blood moons, Passover, Sukkot, Passover, Sukkot. God sending signals on the Jewish calendar because that's what he's using. He's not using our Roman Catholic pagan calendar. He's using his. And so when I saw this, it was like, oh my goodness. This is something that is real. This is something that, how many of you know I cannot control an eclipse? I do not control the biblical calendar. The Jews don't call me for my advice on that. Okay? So what I'm trying to tell you is, this is out of my hands. All I'm doing is saying, this is what happened. And when you look at what happened in the past, you have a biblically prophetic war with the nation of Israel. 48, 67. There's a good chance something like that. We have a lot of biblically prophetic wars that haven't happened yet. Isaiah 17, Psalm 83, different things, Armageddon, whatever. I'm not saying which one, but I'm saying we need to be prepared spiritually because something big is going to be happening over the next 2 years. I don't know if it's going to be at the beginning of 2014 or the end of 2015. But God, at least this time, I believe God has given us a warning in advance. How nice. Rather than, hindsight's 2020, but I believe God is trying to tell us now. So, when these eclipses fall on the divine appointments, this is what tells you it's God communicating to you, and it's not some random event. That's why it's so important, because these eclipses in the biblical calendar are beyond human manipulation. Here, Psalms 19, let me give this to you, verse 1 through 3. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament shows his handiwork, day unto day utters speech, night unto night shows knowledge, and there is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. So God can speak in every language very simply, and everyone can see these. Now, that reminds me of another point I want to make. Not every eclipse is seen from Jerusalem. Some people discount this. Oh, was it seen in Jerusalem? Well, guess what? It wasn't seen in Jerusalem in 67, and they weren't all seen in Jerusalem in 48 either. Okay? But the last one in 2015 is seen in Jerusalem. But here's the reason why I believe they're not all shown from Jerusalem. How many of you believe God loves the whole world, not just Israel? Okay, so everyone around the world within these four get to see that there is an eclipse. But guess what? If you have the internet, you can see it whether you want to or not. If you have the internet, you don't have to run to it. You can actually see it in real time anyway. So that's the point. Now, how many of you have heard the other day of a super moon that happened about a month ago? Do you guys know what a super moon is? Some of you may not, so let me just give you an idea. Here's the Earth. The moon's orbit around the Earth is elliptical. Sometimes it's closer, sometimes it's further away. When it's at its furthest point, it's called its apogee. At its closest point, it's called its perigee. This is from NASA's website. When you have a super full moon, let's bring it in a little closer, it appears larger. The moon doesn't get larger, but it's just because it's closer than at its furthest point, it can look up to 14% larger, okay, when it's at perigee. That's called a super moon. Now, the question is this: how often is there a super moon? Okay, it's about every 14 months. Because that's, just the orbital period of the moon. Well, what are the odds of having a full moon at perigee that is also a total lunar eclipse? What are the odds of having a full moon at perigee that's a total lunar eclipse that falls on a feast day? What are the odds of having a full moon that's a total lunar eclipse falling on a feast day that's seen in Jerusalem? A super moon. Here's a picture of Jerusalem and a picture of a moon. Got to make it a super moon here. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Guess what? The last one that is seen in the Feast of Tabernacles 2015 is just that. So here on Tabernacles, everyone is in their little sukkah looking through the branches at the stars, and they're going to see this super blood moon over Jerusalem. Okay, this is crazy, man. Now, here's the thing. Here's a quick overview of the 7 feasts of the Lord. Leviticus 23, the Lord died on Passover. He was buried on unleavened bread. He rose on first fruits. Pentecost happened on Pentecost. He fulfilled the spring feast to the day of his first coming. How many of you believe the Lord is the same yesterday, today, and forever? Okay, if he fulfilled the spring feast to the day of his first coming, he'll fulfill the fall feast to the day of his second coming. I don't know the year. I don't set the dates. But the events, and so I have only about 19 feast DVD sets left on my table. But if it's like 6 hours of teaching, going through all the feasts that I just went through here in about 45 minutes or an hour, with the book that goes with it, it's only $25 for 5 DVDs in the book. But you can also order them online. Also, we do have biblical calendars on our website. If you go to our website, we have biblical calendars. We're not trying to make a lot of money. They're $5. Okay? And then we just have another one that's a special one that we just made for $10, where we have all the eclipses posted on the calendar. And it's incredible. They'll be delivered this next week, so we'll have those available in about a week. But listen to this. This is 1 Thessalonians 5:1. It says, concerning the times and the seasons, and when you hear seasons here, what are you really thinking? The divine appointments. It says, you don't have any need that I write to you. Why does he need to write to them? Because 1 Thessalonians 5:2 and 4, it says, you know perfectly well that the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night. But listen to this next verse. It says, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, that day will overtake you as a thief. You have to read things in context. Everywhere he says he comes as a thief in the night, it's to the foolish virgins, not the wise virgins. It's to the evil servants, not the wise servants. It's to the sleeping church of Laodicea. Because the sleeping church doesn't know the times and the seasons. They're not on the right calendar. Now let me show you something here. How many of you heard about Comet Ison coming? How many of you have not heard about Comet Ison? Okay. And this is not theory. I'm not talking about Nuribu or any of that. I'm talking, this is fact. I only deal with facts. Okay? Comet Ison, if you Google ISON, this is on NASA's website, all the astronomy websites. This comet is coming. You can be able to see it before November, but November 28th, this thing is supposed to be bigger and brighter than a full moon. A tail 40,000 miles long. It's going to loop around the sun, as you see in this orbit here. As a matter of fact, if you'll notice, this is from NASA's website. This is not me, okay? On November 28th of 2013, this little dirty snowball is going to fly through the sun's atmosphere a little more than 1 million kilometers from the stellar surface. If the comet survives, and it's a big if, it could emerge glowing as brightly as the moon, briefly visible to the sun in broad daylight. The comet's tail stretches into the night sky, could create a worldwide sensation. This is happening on November 28th. Now, all of us is thinking, duh, November 28th. But guess what? That is the first night of Hanukkah, and God says, I'm lighting this candle. But if you don't know the biblical calendar, you don't know that this event is happening on the first night of Hanukkah. This is what I'm talking about. God is trying to say, hello, hello. Is anybody listening? What's amazing is in the works of Josephus, the Jewish historian who lived during the time of Yeshua, he wrote about the destruction of the temple. He mentions in a book called The War of the Jews, book 6, chapter 5.3.289, that there was a star that appeared over Jerusalem like a sword and a comet that continued for almost a year. Now, the Lord has told us there would be signs in the heavens. Well, think about this. Here we have this comet just before the 4 blood moons. That is going to be one of the century's largest comets that are coming again and falling on Hanukkah. So, with that in mind, what I'm sharing with you basically is a warning. Just like a hurricane warning. We don't know. They may not know when they give a warning whether it's going to be a class 1, 2, 3, or 4. They may not even know for sure what part of the United States it's going to hit on. Okay? But as the day approaches, they know more. I really believe, like in the book of Acts, where, Peter said, oh, wow, this is what Joel talked about. I really believe much of prophecy is going to be hindsight. After it happened, we're going to go, oh, this is what God was doing. Okay? What I'm sharing with you tonight is just a warning. Some biblically prophetic signs are happening in the heavens. I do have one little DVD out there at the table too, where I went last year over some very significant things that happened right before and after Pentecost or Shavuot last year. Some amazing signs in the heavens. You'd like to get that. But anyway, so to close with, 2014, right after the first blood moon, I'm going to be doing an Israel trip. And we're only taking one bus of 48 people. Here's a year in advance. We already have about 30 people signed up. But if any of you want to go with Israel to me, we go to places no one ever goes. We get on the armored bus, and we go into Hebron, and we go to Sderot, and we go to Shiloh, and we go to Itamar, and we go to the Lebanon border and the Syrian border. And it's a trip like you've never experienced. So I'm just letting you know, if anybody's interested, you'll have the time of your life. It's totally safe over there. It is. I lead tours every year, and everyone goes away just amazed. Thank you very much.